Thousands of Kiwis are being deprived of bank accounts, leaving them unable to pay their rent, bills or get cash out.
It's billed as a passport to the economy, but getting one isn't always easy.
Have you ever struggled to open a bank account for you or somebody in your family?
The answer for many is yes. A survey of 1,000 Kiwi teens revealed a third of them didn't have a bank account. Many of those living on the streets don't have one either. Former prisoners and foreigners struggle as well.
Problems included people who did not have a proof of address or photo identification, language barriers, or lack of access to a physical bank branch.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detailed today, the move to make banking easier for our most vulnerable. Westpac has stepped up first and is trialling a new basic account where you don't need all the standard requirements. It follows the bank's New Start initiative designed for newly released prisoners. For the bank manager behind it, one man's personal story is driving her.
There's some real magic stories here. Through the New Start process, there was one individual that I spoke to. He was getting a bank account for the very first time in his life. So he was actually 40 years old. And through our New Start process, he got a bank account, but he also had access to his ID for the first time. So prior to this, he was actually putting any income he received into other people's bank account, and it normally resulted in them stealing his money, being financially abused. So in his words, and I'll never forget it because it was a really powerful moment to me as a banker, and he said, having a bank account is... He feels like he's a part of society. He belongs. And when he said this to me, I could see that real confidence. And he was receiving his bank statements, using his EFTPOS card. It was an incredible moment, and it highlighted for me as a banker just that impact that we can have on our most vulnerable people in New Zealand. I do actually carry that story with me to give me fuel to keep going with this work.
That's Louisa Brock, a banker for 16 years and the financial inclusion manager at Westpac Bank. She's seen a lot. She now leads the extra care team and says having a bank account is vital for every Kiwi.
A bank account is like a passport to the economy. Without one, you cannot receive income, you cannot pay bills. A bank account is essential. It's a rite of passage for most of us to open a bank account. I still remember, going to primary school with my little bits of coins and my money book. And I certainly as a mother myself have set my daughter up with a bank account, but this is just not the case for most vulnerable and marginalised groups in New Zealand, where it's really difficult to open a bank account and fulfil the ID verification. But it can be extremely excluding from just doing the day-to-day things in life, like receiving an income or paying the bills. So it is fundamental for someone being successfully a part of society.
So what is required then in 2025 to open a standard sort of everyday account in New Zealand?
We need to know who our customers are, and to onboard and open a bank account, it can be quite complex. You need to fulfill AML and regulatory requirements by providing a proof of address, and you need a couple photo IDs. So for people that are experiencing vulnerabilities, this can be really difficult to fulfill. Might be someone that is in care and moving from house to house, or a woman leaving a domestic violence situation and needing access to an account really quickly and cannot fulfill our ID requirements.
I want to get on to the basic bank account shortly, but why do banks require so much documentation nowadays?
Look, there's really important reasons for us requiring ID to meet Anti-Money Laundering Act.
So, to include them, you guys have come up with the basic bank account. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so we've been on this journey of working to improve financial inclusion here in New Zealand for some time. I've been in this role for 4 years, and it all started because we were working on a project with corrections, which is called New Start, and we were helping soon to be released prisoners have access to a bank account. Now, through that initiative, we started to see some different groups that were excluded, and we felt that it wasn't fair and more needed to be done. So following that, we actually have commissioned 2 research papers with Think Place. And it highlighted in those research papers the importance of helping improve financial inclusion by having this concept of a basic bank account, which is a standard bank account with added controls on it to support someone that is going through a vulnerable circumstance.
So how does it differ then from your standard account?
So the basic bank account pilot is led by Westpac's Extra Care team, which I lead, and we will work closely with community advocacy groups to help people in need who need to open up a basic bank account but aren't able to meet the typical ID requirements. So these might be people that are in our homeless community, children that are in care, or victims of domestic violence that do need access to a bank account fairly quickly, and we'll work closely to help them to open this account. And each account might look a little bit different and have different controls in place to help support the person.
Have you signed anyone up yet?
Yes, we've actually opened a basic bank account for a few people. Now, I think this story really highlights the need for this here in New Zealand, where we had 2 young people that had left an abusive family household. They needed to receive a benefit to help them get set up in life. Now, they'd gone to 2 other banks and unfortunately had been declined because they didn't have the right ID. Now, they were working closely with their teacher, and because we could support them by working with their teacher in their school to fulfill some ID requirements, we are able to open this bank account. We've been working closely with them to offer financial literacy and help them to have a fresh start and get going. And I think the story really highlights that vicious cycle. Like, for them to receive that youth benefit to help them get back up on their 2 feet, they needed to be able to have a bank account. But then to get the bank account, they needed ID. So you can just imagine someone going in that vicious circle and not getting support. So I'm really glad that we could step in to support. And I hope that we can offer more people like this that are going through those vulnerable times.
For the pilot stage of this trial, they'll work with about 20 to 30 clients alongside groups like City Mission, FinCap, Corrections and Oranga Tamariki. The account will have no minimum savings requirement and no bank fees. Victoria University senior lecturer Victoria Stace has studied the financial situation of past and present prisoners and authored 2 reports, Paying the Price and Steps to Freedom. She welcomes the basic bank account trial.
If somebody comes out of prison and they don't have access to banking, then one of the key problems is that they can't immediately get access to their benefit, because you need your benefit being paid into a bank account. There are workarounds which are not ideal. For example, Ministry of Social Development will pay a benefit, I understand, to someone that you nominate, a mate or something, but I'm sure you can imagine that there could be issues with that. But if you can't get access to a benefit straight away, you come out of prison with this one-off grant called a Steps to Freedom payment. It's about $350, which probably doesn't go terribly far. So then you're in a situation where you can't immediately get access to your benefit. And what we were being told is that if there's a period of even several weeks where someone is struggling, that can potentially lead to further offending, because they are basically in a situation where they've got no access to money. And
they're desperate.
Yeah.
Westpac has obviously come up now with this basic bank account. What's your take on that? What difference do you think this will make, particularly for prisoners?
This is really interesting. Now, Westpac's been incredibly helpful in this space. So Westpac introduced a program some years ago whereby they would actually proactively offer bank accounts to people in prison. And this has been a fantastic initiative. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to have been rolled out across all prisons. We're not sure of the reasons for that. And it would seem that everybody's behind this program, corrections, Westpac and so on, but possibly to do with resourcing constraints, it hasn't actually become part of the standard processes that prisoners go through in the lead up to their release. So a fantastic program, but not available everywhere. So this idea of a basic transactional account would certainly address some of the problems, because anti-money laundering requirements do impose obligations on banks to go through a number of steps in order to ensure that they know the customer. So they have to get these 2 forms of ID, and they also have to get proof of address and so on. So I think the idea behind the basic transactional account, although it's actually quite hard to get full details of how it would work, is that there would be less steps to go through to onboard a person. What exactly they're going to require from people in the way of ID is not clear. It could be anything from no ID at all to some form of, just maybe one form of ID, maybe just a birth certificate. So certainly the inference is that it would be less onerous in terms of having to establish who the person was. So that, of course, raises the issue of, well, doesn't that mean that you're compromising the protections against money laundering? So then you've got to say, well, if this account has only limited functionality, then you can put restraints around it so that it makes it less likely to be able to be used for money laundering purposes. So, for example, restrictions on how much you can hold in an account, or how much you can put in or take out over a certain period, to make it much harder to use it for money laundering purposes.
And potentially, hopefully, we'll see a reduction in recidivism rates if prisoners can access this, as soon as they get out of prison.
Well, yes, but I think it's a helpful, incredibly helpful step. I do think that there are still some other issues that need to be sorted out. So ideally, you would have the prisoner set up with one of these basic transactional accounts the day they leave prison. So that does involve some, resourcing and work by the case manager or whoever's responsible for the person before they leave prison to actually get this thing set up. It's probably going to be easier to set it up, but it would still have to be set up. And let's say, for example, it required a birth certificate, then that would still require an application for a birth certificate and paying the money for a birth certificate. So definitely easier. And I think Westpac's not doing it because of prisoners, but because of a whole lots of different types of people who are having trouble accessing banking, and prisoners are just one subset of that. But it would certainly assist. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are a number of other strands to this that need to be sorted out as well. This is a fantastic initiative, and that will certainly help.
Victoria says it should be mandatory for all prisoners to have the option of getting an ID and bank account before they are released.
You want a person to have the best possible chance of going out of prison and staying out of prison. Therefore, it makes sense to ensure that the moment they walk out the door, they have as much already organised for them so that they can have the best chance of reintegrating into society. Now, I'm not a criminologist, and I'm only focusing on the bank account aspect. So what we are proposing is that 6 months before a person is released or goes up for parole, that steps should be taken and that should be built into the prison manual to ensure that they have access to a bank account, that a bank account set up for them, that they have the documents required to set that up. So that would be one thing that could be done in that lead up to a person leaving prison.
How have corrections responded to this? Are they taking it on board? Is it happening?
Very positively.
Good.
Definitely at a high level, as far as we've ascertained, corrections are fully on board to assist with our proposals.
Do you know from the studies you've done, how many behind bars wouldn't have a bank account?
That's a really interesting question. I also wanted to know that. I don't know, but I've been told that the majority of people that come out don't have a bank account. Now, you can't force someone to have a bank account, so we're not saying you have to have a bank account on release. What we envisage is that it would be you're given the option of having assistance to set up a bank account prior to release so that it's available to you on your release. And why they don't have a bank account in the first place, well, there's a number of reasons for that. Potentially they never had one, or they did have one and it was closed for some reason. But for whatever reason, it would seem that there's a lot of people coming out of prison that don't have a bank account.
What about those who have done a long stint behind bars? How confronting is it for them to come out and then go, okay, I want to just, reintegrate into society, I'll set up a bank account, and then how different it all is from perhaps when they went in?
Yeah, absolutely agree. So that is another one of the reasons why we say it's really important to get these accounts set up and functional before the prisoner actually leaves, or before the person leaves the prison, because even if you say, all right, here's your ID documents, off you go into a bank branch and set up your account, I can imagine that there would be some hesitation, potentially. That could be quite confronting. It could be that people would find that hard to actually just go and front up to a bank branch and set up an account on their own. Even the availability of branches is an issue, but for whatever reason, we suggest that it would be good if the account could be set up before the person actually leaves, so that they don't have to deal with the issues around actually going in and sitting down with a bank person and setting it all up.
Westpac's Louisa Brock acknowledges it can be scary for newly released prisoners to walk into a bank.
It's incredibly overwhelming. I have spoken to a few people that have gone through our New Start process, and they highlighted to me it's incredibly intimidating to come into a bank. So, this could be part of the journey that we're actually working with them to feel comfortable to come back into society. What I would love to see is that people having an option. So people coming up to be soon to be released from prison, actually having an option to bank with any of the 4 big banks. I think that would be a great outcome if we can look ahead into the future.
Is that a challenge to them, Louisa?
It could be. I'll let them take it how they will.
Victoria State hopes that other banks will join the crusade and make it easier for customers to sign up, although she points out even if a person has all the right requirements, banks do have the discretion to turn them down.
So at the moment, banks have complete discretion, and often for good reason. So, for example, they've got to take into account things like the safety of their staff, and if someone's got a record of doing some sort of fraudulent activity or something, there could be reasons for not wanting to take that person on. So banks do currently have the option of saying no. So one of the issues is whether that particular issue should be addressed in the sense of having some sort of statutory recognition of a right to a basic transactional account, given how important it is in today's society to have a bank account just to function normally. And that would be one way of forcing all the banks, the major trading banks, to think about, okay, we really have to get into this space and offer people bank accounts, not based on reasons of commerciality, but recognising that banking is an essential service in effect. And of course there would be some reasons where they'd be allowed to not offer someone a bank account, for example, if they were worried about the safety of their staff, for example, or this person had a history of doing bad things with money in the past, not just being not creditworthy, but some sort of illegal activities with fraud and so on. So that's another strand to it, because at the moment banks can say no, we won't take these people on board for whatever reason.
Because there is that flip side where people go, actually, these are criminals. Why do they deserve it? What do you say to that? I
mean, I've heard that view and understand that view. I do think it's probably more important to help people stay out of prison, because it's better for all of us if people can be brought back into the fold, in the sense that people can become an integrated member of society.
Westpac says staff safety is paramount and will always be prioritised.
With the basic bank account, we've created some guiding principles that help us with the onboarding process. So we will work with the individual, but we also will go through a kind of review process. And one thing that's really important for us is around keeping our staff safe. So we will ensure that, if someone has been violent and aggressive previously in our branches, we will need to be taking extra care.
Is there still a chance that someone could get turned down or rejected by this account?
Through our pilot stage, we're not only looking at the successful user cases, but we're also looking at the ones that unfortunately still weren't able to get a bank account, because I think those ones will really help us as a bank, as an industry and as a regulator, highlight where we can make improvements. And that's where I think that there will be collaboration between the industry and people like New Zealand Police or DHB, where we can start to think about alternative ways to support those, because those people are the ones that are truly excluded, that we need to show up more and empower and support them.
So the basic transactional account is a fantastic initiative. It's not something that we're a world leader on, because other countries already have these things. It's wonderful to recognise that this is a way of achieving financial inclusion for people who would otherwise struggle to meet the usual anti-money laundering requirements that are necessary in order to open a bank account. And in particular for prisoners, who are just one subset of those people who struggle to open bank accounts. This is super important, because not only does it give them access to financial inclusion and financial services, but it also is a key part of assisting people to reintegrate into society.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Louisa Brock and Victoria Stace. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Rangi Powik. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.